The quiet hum of the early morning filled the air as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the horizon. At a small, unremarkable bus stop on the outskirts of a sleepy town, life stirred slowly. Commuters shuffled quietly, some clutching coffee cups, while others stared blankly into the distance. It was the start of another ordinary day, until the dog appeared. No one could say where the dog came from. It wasn't one of the familiar strays often seen wandering the neighborhood. Its fur was unkempt, and its eyes held a mixture of urgency and sorrow. The dog trotted into the bus stop's modest shelter, its movements purposeful but not frantic. People took notice, their conversations trailing off as the animal let out a low, mournful whine. An older man, sitting on a worn bench with a walking stick resting beside him, tilted his head in curiosity. His name was Walter, a retired postman with a kind heart and a soft spot for animals. Walter had lived in the area for decades and was known for feeding the occasional stray or lending a hand to a neighbor in need. His days were simple and quiet, marked by routine visits to the park and cups of tea shared with old friends. But something about this dog caught Walter's attention. It wasn't just the animal's presence. It was the way it acted. The dog paced back and forth in front of the bus stop, occasionally stopping to look directly at Walter, its eyes pleading. Then it barked, a sharp, desperate sound that sent a ripple through the otherwise tranquil morning. "Easy there, boy," Walter said softly, leaning forward and extending a hand. The dog paused, watching him intently but didn't come closer. Instead, it barked again, this time more urgently, as if trying to convey a message. Other commuters exchanged puzzled glances. A middle-aged woman clutching a briefcase muttered, "What's it doing? Looking for food, maybe?" Walter shook his head. "No, this isn't about food," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "He's trying to tell us something." The dog's actions grew more insistent. It whined, then barked again, before taking a few steps toward the nearby road and stopping to look back at the people gathered at the bus stop. It was as if the animal wanted them to follow. Walter stood, gripping his walking stick. His knees creaked in protest, but his curiosity outweighed his discomfort. "I'll see what he's up to," he announced, his voice calm but firm. "Be careful," someone called after him, but Walter was already moving. The dog waited, its tail wagging faintly as it watched him approach. When Walter was close enough, the dog turned and began trotting down the road, glancing back occasionally to ensure he was following. The other commuters hesitated, some craning their necks to watch, others returning to their conversations. But Walter couldn't shake the feeling that this dog had a purpose, one that couldn't be ignored. The morning air was cool, and the sound of Walter's cane tapping against the pavement echoed as he followed the animal. They moved away from the bus stop, past rows of houses and toward a cluster of trees at the edge of the town. The dog's pace quickened, its urgency growing more apparent with every step. Walter's mind raced. Why was this dog so determined? Was someone in trouble? Had it come from the woods? The possibilities were endless, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a random encounter. As they neared the edge of the trees, Walter noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. A faint sound, soft, almost imperceptible, drifted through the air. It was a cry. High-pitched and fragile, it cut through the quiet morning like a plea for help. The dog barked again, standing at the edge of the trees and looking back at Walter expectantly. His heart pounded as he stepped closer, his eyes scanning the shadows beneath the canopy. The cry grew louder, unmistakable now. It was the sound of a child. Walter's grip on his walking stick tightened as he moved forward, the dog leading the way. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the ground. Each step brought him closer to the source of the sound, and closer to a truth he wasn't prepared for. Walter's steps quickened as he followed the dog deeper into the cluster of trees. The morning sun filtered through the branches, but the shadows beneath the canopy grew darker, making it harder to see. The cries, however, became clearer, a child's wails, filled with fear and desperation. The dog barked again, stopping briefly to ensure Walter was still following. Its eyes seemed to urge him onward, and Walter's heart raced. His walking stick tapped unevenly against the ground as he moved, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Almost there, boy," he muttered, though the reassurance felt more for himself than the dog. "We're almost there." Finally, the trees opened up to a small clearing. At first glance, the space seemed unremarkable, a patch of earth surrounded by towering oaks and overgrown bushes. But then Walter saw it. A bundle of fabric nestled against the base of a tree. It shifted slightly and the cries grew louder. Walter froze, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The dog darted forward, nudging the bundle gently with its nose before turning back to Walter, barking insistently. The old man's hands shook as he approached, his eyes widening as he realized the truth. It was a baby. The infant lay wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket, its tiny hands clutching at the fabric as it cried. Dirt streaked its face, and its cheeks were red from the chill of the morning air. Walter knelt slowly, his walking stick clattering to the ground as he reached out with trembling hands. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice breaking. "A baby!" The dog sat nearby, its watchful eyes fixed on the child. It let out a soft whine, as if urging Walter to act quickly. He gently lifted the baby into his arms, cradling it against his chest. The infant's cries subsided slightly, its small body relaxing in the warmth of Walter's embrace. "Who left you here?" Walter murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He glanced around the clearing, searching for any sign of who might have abandoned the child. But the area was empty, silent except for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The dog barked again, pulling Walter's attention back. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its posture tense, as if sensing danger nearby. Walter's grip on the baby tightened as he rose to his feet, his knees protesting the sudden movement. "We need to get you to safety," he said, more determined now. "Let's go!" The dog led the way once more, its steps brisk and purposeful. Walter followed as quickly as he could, his heart pounding with urgency. The journey back to the bus stop felt longer than it had earlier, every second weighed down by the responsibility now cradled in his arms. When they emerged from the trees, the bus stop was no longer quiet. A small crowd had gathered. Drawn by the commotion of the dog's earlier actions, conversations hushed as Walter appeared, the baby in his arms drawing gasps of shock and concern. "Is that a baby?" someone exclaimed, their voice filled with disbelief. Walter nodded, his voice firm despite the emotion in his eyes. "Found her in the woods," he said. "This dog led me right to her." The crowd surged forward, their faces a mix of horror and compassion. A woman stepped forward, her phone already in hand. "I'll call 911, she said. "We need an ambulance." The dog sat quietly beside Walter, its tail wagging faintly as it watched the scene unfold. Its earlier urgency had given way to calm, as though it knew the child was finally safe. Minutes later, the wail of sirens broke through the morning air. Paramedics arrived, their movements swift and efficient as they took the baby from Walter's arms. They examined her carefully, their faces softening with relief as they confirmed she was unharmed, aside from mild dehydration and exposure. "You saved her life," one paramedic said, glancing at Walter and the dog. "If she'd been out there much longer..." Walter swallowed hard, his throat tight. "It wasn't me," he said, looking down at the dog. "It was him. He knew." The dog's ears perked up at the sound of Walter's voice, and it leaned against his leg, its eyes shining with quiet gratitude. As the ambulance pulled away, taking the baby to the hospital for further care, the crowd began to disperse. But Walter remained at the bus stop, his hand resting gently on the dog's head. Questions swirled in his mind. Who had abandoned the baby? Why had the dog acted so deliberately? And what would happen next? For now, though, one thing was certain: the baby was safe and the dog had done something extraordinary. The baby's rescue quickly became the talk of the town. News spread like wildfire, and by the afternoon, the bus stop where it all began was surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers. Walter, reluctant to be in the spotlight, kept to himself. But the dog, now affectionately nicknamed Guardian by locals, was the star of the moment. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that the baby, a girl barely a few months old, was stable and recovering well. Social services were brought in, their priority now to find out who the baby was and why she had been abandoned. The situation raised more questions than answers. Walter couldn't stop thinking about the baby. The memory of her tiny, fragile body and her desperate cries lingered in his mind. That evening, as he sat in his modest living room, Guardian at his feet, he sifted through the day's events, trying to piece together the puzzle. "Where did you come from, boy?" he asked, scratching the dog behind its ears. Guardian tilted his head, his expression almost human in its understanding. Walter chuckled softly. "You're not just any dog, are you? You knew exactly what to do." The next morning, Walter received a call from Detective Harris, the officer assigned to the case. Harris wanted to meet with him at the hospital to discuss the rescue and the dog's unusual role in it. Walter agreed, curiosity outweighing his usual aversion to police matters. When Walter and Guardian arrived at the hospital, they were greeted warmly by the staff. Guardian wagged his tail as a nurse knelt to pet him, and Walter couldn't help but smile at the scene. Despite the seriousness of the situation, the dog seemed to bring a sense of comfort wherever he went. Detective Harris ushered them into a private room where he laid out the details of the investigation so far. "We've identified a few leads," Harris said, his tone serious. "The baby was left with nothing to identify her, but we did find footprints near the woods where you said Guardian led you. Small, likely a woman's. We're analyzing them now." Walter frowned. "Do you think she was abandoned? Or could it have been something else?" Harris sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We're not ruling anything out yet. Abandonment is possible, but so is desperation. The area where you found her, it's secluded, not the kind of place someone would stumble upon by accident. Whoever left her there might have been running from something or someone." Walter glanced at Guardian, who sat quietly beside him. "And what about this guy?" he asked, gesturing to the dog. "Any idea where he came from?" Harris smiled faintly. "We've had people call in with tips, but so far nothing definitive. He doesn't match the description of any missing pets in the area, and there's no microchip. But given his actions, I'd say he's more than just a stray. He might have been following whoever left the baby or even protecting her." Guardian barked softly, as if in agreement. Walter couldn't shake the feeling that the dog was more than he appeared. There was an intelligence in his eyes, a determination that went beyond instinct. As the conversation continued, a nurse entered the room, her expression hesitant. "Detective Mr. Walter," she said, "there's someone here asking about the baby. She seems distressed." Harris stood immediately. "Let's go." Walter followed with Guardian close at his heels. They entered the hospital lobby to find a young woman pacing anxiously near the reception desk. Her clothes were worn, her face pale and drawn. When she saw the group approach, her eyes filled with tears. I heard about the baby," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Please, is she okay?" Harris stepped forward, his tone measured. "Who are you, ma'am? Do you know the child?" The woman nodded, her hands wringing nervously. "She's my daughter," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to leave her, but I had no choice. Please, I need to see her." Walter's heart ached at the raw emotion in her voice. Before anyone could respond, Guardian barked sharply and moved toward the woman, his tail wagging. She knelt to the floor, tears streaming down her face as she reached out to the dog. "You were there," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. "You saved her." Guardian leaned into her touch, his body language calm and reassuring. Harris exchanged a glance with Walter before addressing the woman again. "You need to explain everything," he said firmly. "Why did you leave her? What happened?" The woman took a shaky breath, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Her father. He's dangerous. He hurt me, and I knew he'd hurt her too. I thought if I left her somewhere safe, someone would find her. I didn't know what else to do." Her confession hung in the air, heavy with sorrow. Walter felt a surge of compassion for her, his earlier questions giving way to understanding. She hadn't abandoned her child out of neglect or cruelty. She had done it out of fear and love. Detective Harris softened slightly, his tone more compassionate. "You've been through a lot," he said, "but you should have gone to the authorities. Leaving her like that put her in even more danger." "I know," the woman sobbed. "I was scared. I didn't think anyone would believe me." Guardian barked again, his presence a quiet reminder of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them all together. Walter knelt beside the woman, his voice gentle. "You're here now," he said. "That's what matters. And your daughter is safe because of this dog." The woman reached for Guardian again, her tears falling freely. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving my baby." The hospital quieted as Detective Harris, Walter, and Guardian escorted the young mother, whose name was revealed to be Eleanor, to a private room. She sat nervously, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. Guardian settled at her feet, his calm presence offering her silent reassurance. Dr. Avery, the pediatrician caring for the baby, entered the room shortly after. She gave Elena a warm smile. "Your daughter is doing well," she said. "She's healthy and recovering quickly. You can see her in a moment." Elena's tears started anew, but this time they were tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've been so afraid. I didn't think anyone would understand." Detective Harris pulled up a chair and sat across from her. His tone was firm, but not unkind. "Eleanor, we need to know everything. If you want to protect your daughter, we have to understand what you were running from." Elena nodded, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "Her father. He's a dangerous man. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought he'd change, but he didn't. He became worse, violent, controlling. I couldn't let him hurt her the way he hurt me." Walter's chest tightened as he listened. He glanced at Guardian, who seemed to sense the tension in the room. The dog nuzzled Elena's leg, drawing a faint smile from her. "I planned to leave," she continued, her voice trembling. "I packed what I could and ran. But he found me. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I left her somewhere safe, someone would find her and take care of her." Detective Harris leaned forward, his expression serious. "Elena, leaving her alone in the woods was dangerous. She could have..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She was lucky this dog found her." Elena's eyes filled with gratitude as she looked at Guardian. "He's not just a dog," she said softly. "He's a miracle." Dr. Avery stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Elena, your daughter is safe now, but we need to make sure you both stay that way. We can help you get the protection you need." Elena nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I'll do whatever it takes. I just want her to be safe." Detective Harris stood, signaling the end of their discussion. "We'll make sure he can't hurt you again," he promised. "And Guardian here will always be remembered for what he did." Elena followed Dr. Avery to the pediatric unit, her heart pounding as she approached the crib where her daughter lay. The baby's tiny face was peaceful, her soft breaths filling the room. Elena reached out with trembling hands, lifting her into a gentle embrace. "My sweet girl," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'll never let anything happen to you again." Walter and Guardian watched from the doorway, their presence a quiet reminder of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them all together. The bond between Elena and her baby was undeniable, and for the first time in days, Walter felt a sense of peace. Later that day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eleanor stood outside the hospital with Guardian at her side. Social services had arranged temporary housing for her, and Detective Harris assured her that legal proceedings to ensure her safety were already underway. Guardian wagged his tail as he watched Elena buckle her daughter into a car seat. When she turned to face him, her expression was a mix of gratitude and affection. "I don't know where you came from," she said, kneeling to stroke his fur, "but you saved us. I'll never forget what you did." Walter, who had grown attached to Guardian, approached with a small smile. "Looks like he's found a new home," he said. "And a purpose." Elena nodded. "If it's okay, I'd like to keep him. He's already part of our family." Walter grinned, his heart swelling with pride. He couldn't ask for a better one. As the car pulled away, Guardian sat beside Walter, his gaze fixed on the disappearing taillights. For a moment, the world felt still, the weight of the day's events settling like a gentle sigh. "You've done good, boy," Walter murmured, his hand resting on Guardian's head. "Real good." In the weeks that followed, Elena's life took a turn she never thought possible. With the help of social services and the unwavering support of Detective Harris and the hospital staff, she and her daughter, whom she named Grace, found a safe haven. The small, sunlit apartment was modest, but it was theirs, a fresh start, free from the shadows of fear. Guardian quickly adapted to his new home, becoming both a protector and a companion. His gentle presence brought comfort to Elena during sleepless nights and laughter to Grace, who giggled whenever his tail wagged. It was as if he understood the weight of their journey and was determined to ensure their happiness. Elena's story spread throughout the community, inspiring neighbors and strangers alike. Donations poured in, baby supplies, clothes, even a cozy bed for Guardian. People marveled at the dog's instinct and loyalty, calling him a hero and a guardian angel. Walter visited often, his bond with Guardian unshaken. On one of his visits, he brought a small handmade plaque that read, "Home of Grace and Guardian, a place of hope." Elena hung it by the front door, a daily reminder of how far they had come. As the seasons changed, so did their lives. Elena enrolled in job training programs, determined to build a stable future for herself and Grace. She spent her days caring for her daughter and her nights planning for the brighter days ahead. Through it all, Guardian remained by her side, his watchful eyes and wagging tail a constant source of strength. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor decided to visit Walter at the park where they'd first met. Guardian trotted beside the stroller carrying Grace, his steps confident and proud. When they arrived, Walter greeted them with his usual warm smile, his walking stick resting against the bench. "She's growing fast," Walter said, leaning over to tickle Grace's tiny hand. The baby cooed in response, her bright eyes fixed on him. "She is," Elena replied, her voice filled with gratitude, "and I have you and Guardian to thank for that." Walter waved a hand dismissively. "I didn't do much. It was this guy who made all the difference." He reached down to pat Guardian's head, his expression softening. "He's something special." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light across the park, Elena watched Guardian play with a group of children nearby. The dog's joyful energy was infectious, and the laughter of the children filled the air. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elena felt at peace. "I don't know how to repay him," she said softly, her eyes glistening with emotion. Walter chuckled. You already have. You gave him a home, and trust me, that's more than enough. As the months turned into years, Guardian's story became a cherished memory for those who had witnessed it. The bus stop where it all began now featured a small plaque commemorating the dog who had changed so many lives. Travelers paused to read it, their hearts touched by the tale of courage and love. For Elena, Grace, and Guardian, life was a tapestry woven with second chances and unbreakable bonds. They faced challenges together, their resilience a testament to the strength of the human and animal spirit. Guardian remained the heart of their home, his quiet strength a reminder that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. And though he couldn't speak, his actions had said everything. Love and loyalty can save lives, even in the darkest moments. If this heartfelt story of courage and second chances moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's celebrate the power of compassion and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals.